South Africa says 30 million South Africans face varying degrees of food insecurity, yet 10 million tons of food are discarded annually. The organization is calling for food to be repurposed for poor households. Andy du Plessis is FoodForward South Africa Managing Director, and he joins us now to tell us how. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. So repurposing food, how do we do that?
I do. Thank you very much for having us. So across South Africa's food system, on an annual basis, more than 10 million tons of food is lost or wasted. We call this food loss and waste, and the United Nations has a specific day commemorated to make sure that there's an awareness of this food loss and waste across South Africa. And yet at the same time in South Africa, we have a huge food insecurity problem and a malnutrition problem. A third of our children across South Africa suffer from malnutrition. 50% of child deaths in our hospitals are attributed to malnutrition. And what FoodForward South Africa is doing is we're making sure we connect the dots between a food system that has very good quality surplus food that's not sellable but that is edible. And then we get to underserved communities across South Africa where food insecurity and malnutrition are prevalent.
Yeah. So if I am thinking of doing something about this, well, practically, what does someone in their household do?
Yeah, so most of the food is lost or wasted on the pre-consumer side, but before households. According to the CSIR's 2021 technical report, about 18% of that food loss and waste happens at consumer level or household level, but most of that food loss and waste takes place on farms, post-harvest handling, manufacturing, and in the retail sector. And this is where FoodForward SA is collaborating with food system partners to make sure that we timelessly intercept this food and make sure we get it to those in need. So in the last financial year alone, we recovered 22,000 tons of food, equating to over 88 million meals that we were able to redistribute to 2,750 registered non-profit organizations, reaching close to 1 million vulnerable people on a daily basis.
Is this perishable or non-perishable goods? Because you take a look at some retail stores, for instance, they have what they called waste, where they will sell particular stock that they deem not that fit for, I guess, to be on the shelves, essentially. And maybe the staff or other people will buy that or those items at discounted prices. But things such as meat are quite sensitive, for instance. I'm sure you yourself would have noted when you go to a store, if it looks browner than usual, that's red meat at least, it's not something that would be appetizing. And so are we talking about perishable or non-perishable goods?
So we are talking about both perishable and non-perishable goods, but just think about how the food system operates in South Africa, well, globally actually. Farmers, for example, while they're harvesting for a manufacturer or a retailer, there are huge amounts of out-of-surplus goods or they've over-harvested because the goods are ready for harvest, and yet the retailer or manufacturer or customer only wants a certain quantity or certain specification of goods. So what do they do with those surpluses? They donate it to FoodForward South Africa. Across the manufacturing sector, where huge amounts of food is manufactured on a daily basis because they have to have enough food available for retailers and wholesalers to purchase. So they overproduce to make sure that they have enough and they guesstimate volumes. And oftentimes those huge volumes sit on the shelf because the market hasn't taken that. So we get that it's canned goods. We get a lot of frozen meat and fish products, that into our warehouses across the country. We've got one branch in every one of the 9 provinces. And we are able to recover that surplus food across South Africa. And we've made some inroads into the regulatory environment in that regard around surplus food donations as well.
You are also calling rather for labeling guidelines. What does that entail?
Yeah, so in October 2022, we launched a petition for regulatory changes for South Africa around food donations. You will know that South Africa currently does not have regulations for food donations, and we put out a petition into the public for food donation regulatory changes. That was in October last year. At the beginning of this year, That petition was taken up or received by Business Unity South Africa and the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa. And they jointly proposed to NEDLAC's Food Security Rapid Response Team that FoodForward SA present our regulatory changes so that we can reduce food loss and waste and address the problem of food insecurity across South Africa. I'm happy to report, Dudu, that our petition was very well received at NEDLAC, and NEDLAC subsequently invited the Department of Health to work with FoodForward South Africa to make sure that we introduce regulatory changes, and the labeling guidelines that were up for review and that the public comment closed last week. FoodForward SA was able to make a representation for changes to those guidelines. One, to provide a definition for food donations, and secondly, for the labeling guidelines to actually promote food donations so that food system actors will be more inclined to donate that food. So we're happy to report that we've made our proposals, and the Department of Health has supported our view that goods that are past their best before date may still be donated because it is still edible and good for human consumption. And instead of dumping that huge amounts of surplus food in landfills, which is an environmental problem, they can now onward donate that to FoodForward SA. So those labeling guidelines, we look forward to the Department of Health as they amend those regulations. We've also further engaged with the South African Bureau of Standards, and we've asked the SABS to introduce food donation safety guidelines for food donations. So they've undertaken that they will lobby the industry for a South African national standard for food donations. That ballot went out a few weeks ago, and the ballot closes in just, I think, about a week's time. But the meeting from the industry already indicated that food donation guidelines for South Africa are much needed, and it looks like the regulatory environment in that regard is moving into an advantage, because what it now means is that 10 million tons of food that's lost or wasted, we are now able to engage across the food system, farmers, wholesalers, retailers, manufacturers, and encourage them to onward donate that surplus food because we have better guidelines around food donations.
Andy, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Andy du Plessis is the Managing Director at FoodForward South Africa.